She had not planned on becoming a thief. She had planned, if planning was even the word for the desperate daily arithmetic she'd been running since October, on finding work, on the hotel taking her back after letting her go in November, on the seamstress on Cedar Street reconsidering, on someone, anyone, in the town of Harwick, Montana, needing what she had, which was capable hands and a back that had not yet broken under everything it had been asked to carry. None of those plans had worked. And now it was the third week of January, 1886, and her boys had not eaten since yesterday morning, and she was standing in the alley behind Garfield's General Store at 5:15 in the dark, looking at the delivery crate that had come in that afternoon and had not yet been moved to the locked storage. 2 loaves of bread, a paper parcel she thought was salt pork by the shape of it, a tin of something she couldn't read in the dark. She took the bread. She almost took the salt pork. She put her hand on it and then she put it back, because 2 loaves of bread was hungry. Salt pork on top of that was stealing, and she was trying to keep the line between those two things clear even though the line was getting harder to see. She put the bread under her coat and walked back down the alley toward the road and ran directly into the chest of a man coming around the corner. If you've ever done something that shamed you and been met with grace you didn't expect and couldn't have asked for, stay with me to the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. Her name was Louisa Crane. She had been Louisa Vance before she married, and Louisa Crane for 9 years after, and a widow for 7 months. And in those 7 months she had not once stopped moving because stopping meant looking at the whole of it, and the whole of it was more than she could look at and keep going at the same time. Her husband Daniel had been a good man in the way that mattered most to her, which was that he had been kind, specifically and consistently, in the daily way that doesn't announce itself but accumulates into a life. He had been a carpenter who built fine things from plain materials and took satisfaction in the work without requiring anyone to witness the satisfaction. He had loved her without drama. He had loved their boys with the full weight of himself. He died in June of a kick from a horse that caught him wrong. It was fast, which was the mercy in it. He did not suffer. And it was June, which gave her the summer to begin understanding what she was now before the winter told her what that actually meant. The boys were 6. Their names were Caleb and Eli. They were identical in the way of twins who had not yet developed the separate territories of self that would distinguish them in a few more years. Same dark hair, same Daniel eyes, same way of looking at the world as a thing to be negotiated with rather than feared. She loved them with the specific love of a mother who has watched children come into themselves and understood that they are people, not extensions of her, and has been undone by this at regular intervals since they were born. The summer she managed, the fall became difficult, the winter became what it became. Daniel had left her the house, which was rented, and his tools, which she'd sold, and $47, which she'd made last as long as she could by the specific discipline of a woman who had grown up in a household that understood the distance between enough and not enough, and had learned to live in the territory between them. She had looked for work in Harwick from July onward with the systematic persistence of someone who understood that persistence was the only tool she had left. The hotel had taken her on as a laundress through September and into October, and then the manager had told her with the apologetic efficiency of a man delivering news he considered someone else's fault, that a family had moved to town whose daughter needed the income, and would she understand? She understood. She had no choice but to understand. The seamstress had given her piecework through November, 12 cents a shirt, which was slow money made slower by the fact that the boys needed attention in the evenings and the lamp oil was not free. She had done it anyway, 2 shirts a week, some weeks 3, until the seamstress's eyes had gone and she'd closed the shop. December had been the education in what happened when you had exhausted the available options in a small town and the small town had nothing else to offer. She had sold Daniel's watch in December. She had sold her mother's ring in January. She had written to a cousin in Kansas who had not yet written back. And on the 3rd week of January her boys had not eaten since yesterday morning, and she had stood in the alley and made the decision and taken the bread. The man she walked into was large, not performing large, not the width of someone who wanted to be seen, but the settled, substantial large of someone who spent his days doing physical work and had for a long time. She walked into him, and the bread pressed between them, and she took a step back, and he took a step back, and they looked at each other in the particular awkward clarity of 2 people who have just collided. He was perhaps 40, weathered in the way of a man who was outside in all weather because that was where the work was. He was carrying his own parcel from the general store's front door, which meant he had come around the corner from the direction of the entrance, not the alley, which meant he had not seen her at the crate. She did not know, in that first second, whether this was good or bad. She looked at him, he looked at her. His eyes moved to the outline of the bread under her coat, with the unhurried directness of someone who had seen what they'd seen and was not pretending otherwise. She did not look away. She had decided a long time ago that looking away only ever made things worse. "It's Garfield's bread," she said. Not a confession exactly, a statement of fact that covered the ground before he did. He looked at her for a moment. "I know whose bread it is," he said. "My boys haven't eaten since yesterday," she said. "I will pay for it when I have the money. I can work for it. I'm telling you this so you know I'm not—" She stopped. "So you know what this is." He was quiet. The alley was cold, the January dark complete around them, the lamplight from the main street coming around the corner, at a distance that made everything amber and insufficient. "How old?" he said. She looked at him. "The boys." "6," she said. He looked at the parcel under her coat for another moment. "Come around front," he said. "I'll pay for it." She stared at him. "And the salt pork," he said. "You put it back. You should have taken it." His name was August Hale. She found this out when he told Garfield to put the bread and the salt pork on his account, and Garfield said, "Of course, Mr. Hale," with the tone of a man speaking to someone whose account was in good standing and would remain so. She stood at the counter and watched him pay for things she had stolen and things she had not stolen but had wanted to, and she felt the specific feeling of someone receiving something they didn't ask for from someone who had every reason not to give it. He handed her the parcel. "Is there more at home?" he said. She looked at him. "Food?" he said. "For tonight." "Some," she said, which was the kind of answer that meant no but couldn't make itself say so. He looked at the counter, at Garfield, who had developed a sudden interest in his inventory. He bought cornmeal and dried beans and a tin of molasses and 2 pounds of bacon and handed all of it to her without discussion. "Mr. Hale." "August," he said. "I can't accept." "You can and you will," he said, not unkindly, in the same even tone he'd used in the alley, the tone of someone stating what was simply true. "Your boys are hungry and the store is open, and that's the end of it." She stood with the parcel and the additional parcels and looked at this stranger. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "Because I have a ranch 2 miles east and a full larder and no one to feed but myself and one ranch hand," he said. "And because it's January and your boys are 6 years old." She did not say anything else. She walked home in the cold with her arms full of food she hadn't paid for and hadn't earned, and the feeling of owing something she didn't know how to repay. The boys were asleep when she got home. She put the food in the kitchen and stood looking at it for a long time. The bread and the salt pork she'd taken, the cornmeal and beans and bacon and molasses from a stranger's account at Garfield's, more food than they'd had at one time since November. She made a fire. She made supper. She sat at the kitchen table after it was ready and waited for them to wake, which they did at different times, as they always did. Caleb first, because he slept lighter, and Eli 10 minutes behind, because once Eli slept he committed to it. They ate. She watched them eat and said nothing that would tell them how hungry she had been for them to be fed. They didn't need to know the particulars. Children carried what you showed them, and she had been careful, every day since June, about what she showed them. Caleb, who noticed things, looked at the bacon. "Where'd this come from?" he said. "The store," she said. "We don't have money for bacon," he said. Not accusatory, just accurate. "Someone helped us," she said. Eli looked up from his plate. "Who?" Caleb said. "A man named August Hale. He has a ranch east of town." "Do we know him?" "We do now," she said. They accepted this with the practical confidence of 6-year-olds who had learned that questions had answers, and answers were usually sufficient. She let them eat and cleared the plates and put them to bed, and then she sat at the table with the lamp and thought about what she owed and how. She went to his ranch the next morning, not because she had decided to, because she woke up and lay in bed for 20 minutes thinking about the alternative, which was accepting what he'd given and doing nothing about it, and found she couldn't. The boys went to Mrs. Alton next door, who watched them on the mornings Louisa went to town looking for work. Mrs. Alton had 3 grown children and no grandchildren, and considered Caleb and Eli a reasonable substitute and charged nothing, which was the only reason the arrangement was possible. The road east was 2 miles of frozen mud and cold wind off the mountains that had not yet finished deciding how serious it intended to be this winter. She walked it because she didn't have a horse. The ranch was what she'd expected of a man who paid for strangers' groceries without discussion. Not showy, but solid. A house built by someone who understood structure. A barn that was closed against the cold, but from which she could hear the sounds of animals tended. A second smaller building that was probably the bunkhouse. She knocked. He opened the door in the way of a man who had heard someone coming from a distance and had been waiting since. He looked at her. "Mrs. Crane," he said. "Louisa," she said, because he'd told her his first name. He stepped back from the door. She came in. The kitchen was a working kitchen, not a comfortable one, functional, clean in the way of a man who knew disorder cost time, with none of the domestic particulars that made a house feel inhabited rather than occupied. He poured coffee without asking, and she took it, and they sat at the table. "I want to work for what you gave us last night," she said. He looked at his coffee. "And going forward," she said, If the offer is there." He looked at her. "What offer?" "I don't know yet," she said. "I'm making one. Whatever you need in the house. Cooking, cleaning, the domestic side. I'm capable and I work hard, and I'll work for fair wages or for food if you'd rather, or for both if the work justifies it." He was quiet for a moment, in the way of a man who is not deciding whether to say yes, but deciding how. "Why not just accept what I gave?" he said. "Because I'm not asking for charity," she said. "I'm asking for work." "There's a difference." "Yes." He looked at his coffee. "I have a ranch hand," he said. "Pierce. He's good for the barn and the cattle. He can't cook anything worth eating, and he doesn't try." "I can cook," she said. "I can see you're going to tell me you can do everything." "I can do everything that wants doing in a house," she said. "I've been doing it since I was 12. I ran my parents' house, and then my husband's, and then my own for 9 years. I'm not telling you what you want to hear. I'm telling you what's accurate." He looked at her for a moment. "The boys," he said, "they go to school on the days school runs. The other days I'd bring them." "How old is the school out in this weather?" 3 days a week, sometimes 2. "So they'd be here most days?" "Yes," she said. That's the honest answer. If it's a reason to say no now. He looked at her in the way she was coming to understand was his particular quality. Not slow, not unkind, just the deliberate pace of a man who did not speak until he was sure of what he was saying. $6 a month, he said. "Room and board on the days you're here. Your boys eat here." She looked at him. "That's more than the position warrants." "It's what I'm offering," he said. "You can negotiate down if you want." She did not negotiate down. "When do I start?" she said. "You're here now," he said. She started with the kitchen, because the kitchen told her what else needed doing. The kitchen at Hale's Ranch told her, capable man, no interest in his own comfort, food as fuel rather than pleasure, a larder stocked with practical things, and none of the small things that made cooking more than the minimum. She spent the first morning reorganizing and the first afternoon cooking a proper meal. Not elaborate, but assembled with the attention that distinguished something made from something produced. August Hale and Pierce, his ranch hand, ate supper that first evening in the focused silence of men eating something that warranted attention. Pierce was perhaps 60, with the compressed manner of a man who had decided opinions were expensive and was conserving them. He looked at his plate. "First decent meal since August," he said. "It's January," she said. "Yes," Pierce said. He went back to eating. August looked at his plate and said nothing, which she had already identified as how he registered satisfaction. The boys came the following Monday, which was a school dark day. She had told them the night before. "We're going to the Hale Ranch. It's where I work now. You will be respectful, and you will not make problems." Caleb had said, "What kind of problems?" "Any kind," she'd said. Eli had said, "What does the ranch have?" "Cattle," she'd said. "Any horses?" "Probably." They had gone to bed with a calm that she suspected was less about obedience and more about horses. August met them at the door the way he'd met her. No performance, just present. In the particular way of a man who didn't make a production of anything. The boys looked at him. He was large from their perspective, which was 6 years old and looking up. They looked at him with the assessment they gave everything new. "Caleb and Eli," August said. A statement, not a question. She'd told him their names. "Yes, sir," Caleb said. "There's a bay horse in the near barn that needs to be talked to this morning," August said. "Pierce is out with the cattle and she doesn't like being alone." Eli looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at August. "We can do that," Eli said. "I'll show you where," he said. He took them to the barn. She stood in the kitchen and listened to the sound of boots on frozen ground going away from the house, and she put the morning's bread on to rise, and thought about what kind of man showed 6-year-old boys to a horse that needed company. The winter found its shape. She came to the ranch 5 days a week, the boys beside her on the days they weren't in school, and she ran the house the way she ran everything, completely and without waste. The cooking, the cleaning, the inventory of the larder that she updated on a slate by the pantry door so there were no surprises about what was running low. She took over the household accounts in the 3rd week because she found, doing the marketing, that there was a pattern of overpaying for certain goods that a little attention could correct. She corrected it without mentioning it. August noticed. "The supply bill was $8 less this month," he said one evening. "I found a better price on flour from the mill in Garnett rather than Garfield's. And the coffee comes from the supply house in Billings if you order in bulk. It takes 3 weeks, but the savings are significant." He looked at the account book she'd been keeping. "You rearranged my accounts," he said. "I reorganized them. The system you had was—" She paused. "It was losing you visibility into where the money was going." He looked at the book for a long moment. "My wife kept the accounts," he said. She looked at him. "She died 4 years ago," he said. "I've been doing them since. Badly, apparently." "Not badly," she said. "Just differently than someone trained for it." He closed the book. "Keep them," he said. "If you're willing." "It's part of the work," she said. He nodded. She went back to the kitchen. She found out about his wife not from him but from Pierce, who communicated in the compressed, efficient way of a man rationing words, and who apparently decided, at some point in the 2nd week, that she was going to be around long enough to be worth informing. He told her on a morning when August was in the north pasture, and the boys were in the barn with the bay horse, whose name turned out to be Mabel, and whose dislike of solitude had become the organizing principle of the boys' ranch days. "Sarah Hale," Pierce said, in the middle of eating lunch. "Fever took her. Winter of '82. They had a daughter. She went with the fever too. She was 2. He ate another spoonful. "He doesn't talk about it," he said. "Not that it happened, but not like it didn't. He just runs the ranch." She looked at the table. "Why are you telling me?" she said. "Because you'll notice things, and I'd rather you understand them than not." Pierce said. He finished his lunch and went back outside. She sat with this information in the kitchen and thought about a man who had come around the corner of an alley on a January night and told a woman who had stolen bread that he'd pay for it, and then bought her enough food to see her through the week. She thought about what shape grief took when you ran it into work, the way some people ran it into drinking, how it went quiet in a man who had decided that moving forward was the only direction available. She thought about the bay horse that didn't like being alone. She did not say anything to him about any of it, but she noted it and understood the ranch a little differently after. Caleb fell in love with the cattle. This was not something she had predicted. She had predicted the horses, based on Eli's question the night before their first visit, and Eli did love the horses with the straightforward devotion of a boy who had found his specific thing. But Caleb, who was more interior than his brother, who watched things before he engaged with them, attached himself to the cattle with a focus that surprised her. He asked August questions. August answered them. This happened in the margins of the day, in the spaces between her work and his, when Caleb found him coming in from the south pasture or going to check the north fence. She heard fragments of it through windows and open doors. The questions were specific, not the surface questions of a curious child, but the structural questions of someone trying to understand how something worked. Why do they stay together when one of them moves away? How do you know when they're sick before they show it? What does the grass look like when it's been grazed right versus when it's been grazed too hard? August answered each one with the same directness he gave everything, without simplifying, without the condescension some adults applied to children like a coat of varnish over the real thing. He treated Caleb's questions as the questions they were, genuine, worth answering well. She watched this from a distance and filed it. Eli came in one afternoon in the third week with hay in his hair and the expression of someone who has received important information. August said Mabel had a foal last spring, he said. Did he? He said the foal went to a ranch in Garnet, but he said Mabel still looks for her sometimes. A pause. He said that's just what mothers do. She put down the bread she was kneading. He said that. Yes. Eli considered. I think he was talking about more than the horse. She looked at her 7-year-old son. Probably, she said. Eli went back outside. She stood at the kitchen counter and thought about a man who talked to a 6-year-old about horses who looked for things they'd lost, and whether he knew he was doing it. She thought he probably did. February came with the weight of a winter that had decided it was not finished. The cold that month was the serious kind, not the dramatic cold of the first blizzard, but the persistent grinding cold that settled into everything and made each day's work harder by the degree that cold makes all work harder. She walked the 2 miles each morning and felt it in her hands and feet before she'd gone a quarter mile, and by the time she reached the ranch she was cold through to the place where cold stops feeling like a temperature and starts feeling like a condition. August saw her arrive on the 8th of February and looked at her hands. I'll come and get you, he said. She looked at him. In the mornings I pass the road into town anyway for the south pasture check. I'll bring you. I don't want to be a trouble. You're not a trouble, he said, the same tone he'd used in the alley. You're frozen. She looked at her hands. All right, she said. He came at first light the next morning with the wagon and she put the boys in the back with the blankets she'd thought to bring, and they drove in the pre-dawn cold with the particular silence that early mornings had when the world had not yet started the day's noise. She sat beside him on the bench and watched the road and said nothing for the first mile. August, she said. Louisa. Thank you. For this and for January. He was quiet for a moment. You don't have to keep thanking me, he said. The thanks was said. I know, she said. This is a different thanks. This is for the ongoing version. The ongoing version is just giving you a ride to work in cold that'd freeze a stone, he said. It doesn't require thanks. Everything requires thanks, she said. My mother was very clear about that. He looked at the road. Then you're welcome, he said. They drove the rest of the way in the morning quiet with the boys asleep in the back against each other, the automatic closeness of twins who, even in sleep, found each other first. She found out he'd had a daughter when she found the chair. It was in the back room off the kitchen, a room she hadn't fully sorted yet because it was full of stored things, and she'd been working on the more immediate parts of the house first. She went into it in the second week of February to find a cast iron pan she knew she'd seen somewhere, and she found it. And she found, in the corner under a piece of canvas, a child's rocking chair, small, painted yellow, the paint worn at the arms where hands would rest. Solid construction, he'd made it, she could tell from the joinery, which was the same quality as the house, built by someone who understood wood. She covered it back with the canvas and went back to the kitchen. She didn't say anything, but she thought about it for a long time. About a man who had made a chair for a daughter who had died at 2 and couldn't put the chair away and couldn't bring it out. The particular limbo of a grief that had nowhere to go. She thought about her own boys asleep in the back of the wagon that morning, leaning against each other. She thought about what you were left with when what you were building toward was gone, and you had to find a way to keep building anyway. Caleb asked August about the cattle one evening in February. Not a specific question this time, a general one, which from Caleb meant something. Did you always know you wanted a cattle ranch? August was at the table with his coffee. The boys were supposed to be washing up for supper. Caleb was doing the thing he did, which was to ask the question from the doorway on the way to somewhere else, as if the location gave him distance from it. No, August said. My father had the ranch. I grew up on it. So you just stayed? I went away first, worked 2 years in Missouri, then came back. Why? August drank his coffee. Because the ranch was here and I knew how to run it, and it turned out that was the thing. What thing? The thing you do, that you're for. Caleb stood in the doorway and thought about this. How do you know what you're for? He said. August looked at him with the full attention he gave the cattle questions. You don't always know right away. Sometimes you find out by doing other things first and noticing which one pulls at you when you're doing the others. What pulled at you? The land, he said. Always the land. Caleb stood with this for a moment. I think maybe cattle, he said. I know, August said. I've been watching you think about it. Caleb looked at him. I'll show you the account side in spring, August said. When the ledgers open for the new season, if you want. The account side of cattle? Ranching is half outside and half numbers. You've got the outside part natural. Might as well see the numbers too. Caleb was very still in the way of someone receiving something they didn't expect. Okay, he said. He went to wash up. Louisa stood in the kitchen and did not let her face do the thing it wanted to do, which was something too large for the moment to hold. She stirred the soup. She stayed late on a Friday in February because there was a stew that needed another hour, and she didn't want to leave the stove unattended in the cold, and by the time it was done, the dark had come in fully, and August said the road was too iced for the walk. The boys can sleep in the back room, he said. There's a bed there. She thought about the canvas in the corner, about the yellow rocking chair. They'll be fine with that, she said. He made up the bed and she put them in it, which took approximately 3 minutes because they were cold and tired and had spent the day in purposeful activity and were done. She pulled the blanket up and Eli said, "Good night." And Caleb was already asleep. She came back to the kitchen. August was at the table. She poured herself coffee and sat across from him because the alternative was going to stand in the corner, and there was no reason for that. They sat for a while without talking. She had gotten comfortable with his silences in 2 months. They were the silences of a man thinking rather than a man absent, which was a different thing entirely. You went into that room today, he said. She looked up. I could tell, he said. The canvas was moved. She looked at her coffee. I was looking for the cast iron pan. Did you find it? Yes. He was quiet. Her name was Clara, he said. She had Sarah's hair. She would have had Sarah's way of doing things, I think, though 2 years isn't long enough to be sure. He looked at his hands. I built the chair before she was born. I had a year to build things. She said nothing. I can't put it away, he said. And I can't bring it out, so it stays in the canvas. That makes sense, she said. He looked at her. Does it? It makes the kind of sense that isn't about logic, she said. It's just where you are with it. You don't have to be anywhere else. He held her gaze. My husband's watch, she said. I sold it in December. I had to, but the day I did it, I walked home from the jeweler's by a different route so I didn't pass the places I'd been with him. She paused. That didn't make sense either. He wasn't in those places. But I walked the other way. August was very still. The thing about grief, she said, is that it doesn't do what you think it should. It does what it does. Yes, he said. And you work around it, she said. Not through it, around it. Like how a river works around a rock. The rock doesn't move, but the water still gets where it's going. He looked at her for a long time. You're a plain-spoken woman, he said. My mother said plainness was a courtesy, she said. The time people spend puzzling out what you meant is time they could be doing something useful. Something moved in his face, not quite a smile. He was not a man who smiled easily, but the warmth that lived in the space where a smile would be, if he were the kind of man who let them out. Your boys are good, he said. Caleb especially. He thinks like someone older. He always has, she said. It's useful and worrying in equal measure. He said he thinks maybe cattle. I heard. He's right, August said. It's not a polite observation. He actually reads the herd. He saw a cow favoring her left rear leg yesterday and told Pierce before I did, and Pierce has been reading cattle for 30 years. She looked at her coffee. Daniel would have... She stopped. His father built things. He didn't have the land instinct, but he would have been glad about it. The instinct can't be taught, August said. You either read living things or you don't. Caleb does. She sat with this, with what it meant that someone had seen this in her son and had told her, had named it clearly. Thank you for telling me that, she said. It's just true, he said. True things still deserve saying, she said. He looked at her for a moment across the kitchen table. Louisa, he said. She waited. What are you going to do in the spring? He said. When the contract season opens up, the hotel will need laundresses. The seamstress is gone, but there'll be something. She looked at him. I haven't thought past winter, she said honestly. I've been trying not to. Winter has been enough to think about. That's reasonable, he said. But spring is coming. I know. He looked at his coffee. I'm asking, he said, because I'd like to know if you're staying. She looked at him. Staying here, she said. At the ranch, in whatever capacity makes sense to say out loud. He paused. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight. I'm asking because I want to know if you're thinking about it or if you've already thought about it and decided. She sat with the question. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the February dark was serious, the cold doing what February cold did in Montana, which was everything. Inside, the boys were asleep in the back room and the stove was going and the coffee was warm and the accounting on the slate by the pantry door showed a house that was running correctly, that had been running correctly since October when she'd started, and that would run correctly tomorrow. I'm thinking about it, she said. The honest answer is, I've been thinking about it for a while and I haven't found a reason not to. What would the reason not to look like? He said. If this were something other than what it seems, she said. If you were a different kind of man, if my boys weren't... She paused. My boys are going to be difficult to move, in the spring, from this place. I know, he said. Mabel and the cattle account ledgers, she said. Yes. She looked at him. You knew that was happening, she said. I watched it happen, he said. I didn't arrange it, but I watched it. And you let it. Yes, he said. She held his gaze. August, she said. Louisa. Whatever this is, she said, I want it to go slowly. Not because I'm uncertain, because things that go slowly are harder to undo if something goes wrong, and I have 2 6-year-old boys who attach to things they trust, and I'm not willing to have them attach to something and have it come undone. Yes, he said. That's right. You agree. I have no interest in going fast, he said. I've been alone for 4 years. I know how to wait. She looked at him. All right, she said. Then I'm staying. For spring. And we'll see what the shape of it is. He nodded once. For spring, he said. March came, and the winter released its grip in the grudging, incremental way of winters that have been serious, pulling back from the south slopes first, the mud arriving before the warmth, the creek running high with the melt. She brought seeds for the kitchen garden in March. She'd had them since October, saved from the garden at the rented house on Birch Street, wrapped in paper and labeled in her careful hand. She put them in the ground in the beds on the south side of the house that had clearly been a kitchen garden once and had been let go. Eli helped her, not Caleb, who was in the south pasture with August and Pierce, learning whatever was to be learned in the south pasture in March. Eli, who had the horses and had also, apparently, found the garden. They planted on their knees in the March mud, and Eli asked the questions he asked about everything, which were thorough and sequential, and she answered each one in the way her mother had answered them, directly, as though the question was serious, because it was. Why do you plant before it's warm enough? Because the seeds need to start in the cold. They learn to want the warmth. What if it frosts? Some of them die. The ones that don't are stronger. He patted dirt around a seed with the serious attention of a 6-year-old doing something real. August's wife had a garden, he said. She looked at him. He told me, Eli said. He said she knew which things to put next to each other. Companion planting, she said. He said she tried to show him, but he wasn't a very good student. He told you that? He said he was better with animals than plants. Eli considered. I think he was glad we're putting things in. She looked at the bed they'd planted, at the seeds in the ground that didn't look like anything yet but knew what they were. I think so too, she said. Spring came. The account ledgers opened for the season, and Caleb sat at the kitchen table with August on a Saturday morning, and August showed him how the numbers worked. The cost of feed against the cattle weight, the market prices, the seasonal calculations that determined when to sell and when to hold. Caleb followed with the focused intensity he brought to everything that interested him. He asked questions that went directly to the structure of things, that skipped the surface and looked for the mechanism. So the decision about when to sell isn't just about the price today. It's about what the price is going to be. It's about what you think the price is going to be, August said, which requires knowing why it's what it is right now. How do you know that? You read the market the same way you read the herd, patterns. What changed and when and why? Caleb looked at the ledger. Can I try? He said. With the numbers from last fall. Can I work out what you should have done and you tell me if I'm right? August looked at him. Yes, he said. Caleb worked the numbers for an hour. August watched without commenting. At the end of it, Caleb pointed to the 3rd week of September in the ledger. Here, he said. The price dropped this week and then came back up 2 weeks later. If you'd waited, $23 more, August said. Caleb looked at the number. I was right? I did wait, August said. So yes. Caleb stared at the ledger. August said nothing. She was at the stove and she did not turn around. She heard the silence and let it be what it was, which was a 7-year-old boy who had just found out he was right about something that mattered, sitting with that knowledge in a kitchen on a spring morning, while the man across from him waited for him to be done being astonished. "Okay," Caleb said. "Okay," August said. She put the bread in the oven. She found the yellow chair on the porch in April. She came in the morning and it was there, outside the front door, sitting in the morning light with the paint worn at the arms and the small size of it, and it was not under the canvas anymore. She stood in front of it for a long time. August came out of the barn. He saw her looking at it. He came to stand beside her. "I thought it should be outside," he said. "In the morning light." She looked at the chair. "It's a beautiful chair," she said. "You built it well." "I had a year to get it right," he said. "You could build more," she said. "If you wanted to?" He was quiet. "Not to replace it," she said. "Not that, but alongside it." He looked at the chair for a moment. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "About what alongside looks like." She looked at him. "It looks like this," she said. "Like a chair in the morning light and a kitchen garden going and 2 boys who can't be moved from this place and an account ledger that's running correctly." "That's a practical definition," he said. "I told you my mother believed in plainness," she said. He looked at her with the look she'd been learning since January, the one that had more in it than his face usually let through. "Louisa," he said. "August. I'd like to ask you something," he said. "Directly." "That's the only way you ask things," she said. "Will you stay?" he said. "Not for spring, for good, all 3 of you." She looked at the chair. She thought about January and the bread in her coat, and a man coming around a corner who had every reason to walk her to the sheriff, and had instead walked her to the counter and bought salt pork and molasses, and never mentioned it as a debt. She thought about Caleb and the ledger, and Eli and Mabel, and the garden going in the south beds, and the seeds her mother had saved, and her mother's mother before that. She thought about a river and a rock, and the water that goes around. "Yes," she said. He did not reach for her hand the way a dramatic man might have. He stood beside her, looking at the chair in the April morning, and nodded once. The nod of a man who has asked a real question and received a real answer, and is satisfied with the economy of it. "Good," he said. "Good," she said. Behind them, from inside the house, the sound of the boys beginning the day, Caleb's voice and Eli's, the back and forth of brothers whose particular language of shorthand and argument and alliance had been the sound of her mornings for 6 years. She went inside to start breakfast. He went to the barn. The yellow chair sat in the April morning in the light. There are women who are reduced by hunger, and there are women who are clarified by it. Louisa Crane had been clarified. She had gone into that winter knowing what mattered: her boys, her hands, her willingness to keep going, and come through it with those things, and something else besides, something she had not looked for because she had been too busy surviving to look for anything. What she had found was a man who understood the difference between charity and work, and had offered her the work she asked for after giving her the charity she needed before she could ask. Who had watched her sons become themselves in the particular environment of his ranch, and had not taken credit for it. Who had put a yellow chair in the morning light in April, and stood beside her without ceremony, and asked her plainly to stay. She stayed. The garden in the south beds came in that summer, better than expected, the way gardens came in when they had been planted by someone who knew what they were doing, and watered by a boy who found plants as interesting as horses. Eli monitored it with the same attention he gave Mabel, which was total. Caleb spent the summer with August and Pierce in the education of a boy who had found his thing early and was getting the full benefit of people who recognized that and took it seriously. In August Hale built a chair. Not to replace the yellow one, which stayed where it was on the porch in the morning light. A new one, a different size, a different wood. He built it in the evenings after the work was done, in the way he'd built the first one, with care and time and the joinery that was his particular quality. He put it beside the yellow one. She came out one morning and found them both there. She sat in the new one. She looked at the yellow one beside her. "It's good," she said. "I had less than a year this time," he said. "It doesn't need a year when you know how," she said. He sat on the step below her with his coffee. The boys came out behind her, and Eli went immediately to the garden, and Caleb went to find August, who was sitting right there, and said without preamble, "The price on the fall cattle is going to drop by October. I think we should sell in September." August looked at him over his coffee. "Why October?" he said. And they were off, Caleb standing in the morning with his theory, and August listening with the full attention that was his particular gift, the attention that said, "You are worth taking seriously. Your question is a real question. I am here." She sat in the new chair beside the yellow chair in the April morning that had become the August morning of a different year, and she looked at all of it, her sons and the man and the ranch and the garden and the chair, and felt the thing that came after surviving, which was not happiness exactly, not the uncomplicated kind, but something more permanent than that, the kind that had been built from what was hardest, the kind that stayed.